Another set of key terms that I wanted to differentiate has to do with the philosophy of bias, because scientists try to be as objective as they can when they're doing studies. You're trying to remove all subjectivity from the science, because that's what makes things sound more like pseudoscience. More, when you put perspective, feelings, beliefs, or your desires into the experiment, you end up changing the process. We talked about this, and we talked about sources of errors earlier in this lecture series. But basically what I'm trying to say here is that a true scientist tries to avoid subjectivity as much as possible. However, there's something to be said about the value of subjectivity. We are human beings, and the same place our imagination and creativity comes from is the place where our subjectivity comes from. We have the creativity and imagination because we have inferences based on previous experience. And it's very hard to separate yourself and the research that you're doing from those things. And it's sometimes from that nature that new ideas come from. Although the danger of subjectivity is when it closes your mind and makes you only see what you want to see. And that's the problem with science. We want to see, we want to have the open mind to criticism and to skepticism, and that's not going to happen if you're constantly bringing to the experiment your preconceptions that you already have. So you try to be objective. You try to create a manner of research where the results are independent of the experimenter. However, no matter how much random assortment, how much blind and double blind you do, scientific theory and philosophy tells us that the act that you're studying something will change what you're studying in itself. It's called the Heisenberg Uncertainty principle. The closer you try to get to understanding something, the less control you're going to have over that something, and vice versa. Therefore, when you're studying something, you're going to end up changing the thing that you're actually studying, what you're actually measuring, and that means it's technically impossible to have complete objectivity. But yet science will do its best to get there. Another type of key term that I wanted to differentiate has to do with the number of studies that it's being done to understand a phenomenon. A lot of times, a scientist will do one single study performed once to try to understand something. But science usually tries to replicate that experiment. Other people will try to do the same thing, and other people will look at it from a different perspective. Remember, science is a multidisciplinary study, and so that means that people from physics, from chemistry, from biology will all try sometimes to study the same phenomena, as it is the case with evolution. So what is needed then is to get together and put the data from all of these experiments into one analysis to see what is the overall picture, what is being said about the phenomena. In psychology, this is very common. When one person studies something, say depression, and other people study the same thing from different perspectives, and then you're trying to get all those perspectives together in what is called a meta-analysis. And that's when you do a study that combines and correlates the data from multiple studies, and then makes a stronger assertion about what do we currently know about this phenomena that we're trying to understand. So it's basically doing mathematical analysis of the results of multiple studies at the same time. And that's meta-analysis versus a single study. Another key term that I wanted to differentiate in terms of science is a single versus a factorial design. In science, you try to do true experiments where you only change one variable at a time. That's called an independent variable that affects the dependent variable, which is what you're trying to study, which means you're going to try to hold everything else constant, right? So that you can make sure that it was the independent variable and not something else that caused the outcome. And to do that, you have to have a control group so you compare doing the change versus not doing the change to see if it was truly what you did that made the difference. That is basically what an experiment is. But sometimes the scientists want to do what is called a factorial design. And that's when you do multiple variables to see what they do to the dependent variable. Now, the way that you're going to do this is that you're going to create a design where you're going to set up the relationships that exist between each of the variables you're examining. And I'll keep it with only two to make things easier. So I think that both A and C could affect B. So I'll change them both at the same time and see what the effect in B is. And I also look at the relationship that exists between A and C. How do I do that? Well, I'll do one experiment that's just seeing what smoking does to cancer. I'll do another experiment that's seeing what exercise does to cancer. And then I'll do another experiment where both of them together are used to see what they do to cancer. And then what I can do that, and I can see the effect of A, the effect of C, and the combined effect of A and C on cancer. And that's the idea of a multifactorial design. That's the advantage of doing things that way. You do one experiment here, another experiment there, and then you do look at them at the same time. And that adds value to your analysis because you can truly understand the phenomena from a more broad perspective by trying to understand all the factors that could possibly cause that phenomena. The last set of key terms that I wanted to differentiate that sometimes show up in science research are the ideas of originality. There's two main types of studies. There are original studies and replication studies. Now, original studies are the first studies of its kind to be done. In the 90s, it was the first time that somebody actually cloned an animal, Dolly the famous sheep. Sadly, she ended up dying of lung problems. We'll talk about why that happened later in the year as we talked about biotechnology. But it wasn't truly accepted as something until more people went and replicated the same thing they did and even expanded on the replication and did it with other animals. So original experiments are the first experiment that's done of its kind. And then replication studies are doing exactly the same that it's done before or the same thing but expanding on the concept. And that's another very important concept in science because, as we know, part of the peer review process is to replicate what other scientists have done and expand on that. And that's what actually makes science builds and grows over time.